Alright, so I'm gonna do, or try to use Excel here as soon as it opens. So, for Excel, when you first open it, you have all these different things, school planners and stuff like that, but for right now we'll just use the blank workbook. Excel is particularly useful for statistics. In terms of statistics, obviously you have all these cells that you can input. The easiest way or the most basic way of using it for statistics I've noticed is for using columns as your variables and then listing them like a table. So we'll do X and Y, and then we'll just go from 1 to 10. And then we'll do some Y values. So let's say we have these here. First thing we can do is we can actually graph these if we use insert and scatter plot to graph them. And this isn't the only thing we can do with this scatter plot. Make it larger. If we go over here to the plus sign, we can change the elements of the chart, which is actually particularly useful. Data labels, axis titles, if you want to name them something particular. If you're comparing, say, instead of X and Y variables, we could change it to number of textbooks to number of students, or something similar to that. You can use that, the axis stuff, to change it. And then obviously you can change the title of your graph up here. In terms of the other things you can also add a legend on the side if you want to change anything like that. Your error bars, about how much error for each point. The trend line is particularly useful for like Math 1 when you're doing lines of best fit. So if we do this, we can even choose between linear, exponential, anything like that. So with linear, we can do that. And if you double click on it, you can actually go over and look at the options of the trend line, such as we can get it to display the actual equation of it. And we can even click on the trend line. We can get it to display the r-squared value for us. We can set it to go through a certain intercept if we wanted it to. Say if we wanted it to go through 1, it would fit new line of best fit that would intersect at the y-intercept 0, 1. So those are all pretty interesting features that you can use for the Math 1 concept in lines of best fit and correlation. But that's not all that Excel has to offer for this. Another interesting thing Excel does is Excel has access to formulas that are already built into the program, such as if you know them, you can just start with the equal sign. But if you don't, there's a whole formulas tab up here for financial ones, logicals, math, and trig. These are particularly useful. You know, you have cosine here. That's for trig and everything. But we can do, for instance, one I've done before is the binomial distribution probability. And then it'll tell you when you type them in what you need for each aspect of it. So number of successes, let's say that's 8. In trials, let's say there's 15 trials. The probability of success is 0.8. And then cumulative, it comes over here. If you either type a true or a false value for this, and the true will give you the cumulative distribution function, and then the false value will give you the probability. So obviously if we do true, it's going to tell us the chance of getting at most 8 successes. And then if false will give us the chance of getting exactly 8 successes. So let's do false, and then you just hit enter and it will calculate it automatically. And it shows this value, but up here in the line, it will still keep your function, so you can easily edit it and not have to go back and change or anything. So for instance, if I didn't want that, I wanted it to be true instead, I just go back up and change it to true, and it'll change the value straight up. And that's the same with any aspect of it. If I also wanted to change it to 20 trials, it goes to there. So that's one of the few things it can do. But you also have your basic formulas, sum product, which are this makes it a lot easier in the more advanced stats classes, where formulas can get pretty long and consist of products of x squared, y squared, things like that. It makes it a lot easier when you have a dedicated formula for it, rather than have to type in all the parentheses and squares and division symbols for it. So that's one of the few things it can do in terms of formulas. So there's a lot of them. As you can see up here, there's several tabs with a bunch of lists. And even, like I said, there's the devoted math one for all kinds of things. Sum product, sum x squared, tan, the truncation, round up, round down. And see, the more functions, here's the statistical one as well. So there's the binomial distribution we used. You can do confidence for t-test and t-distribution. There's the f-test, f-distribution. But for basic statistics, the main thing that makes this really useful is, for instance, let's say these are my data points here, and I want to know the average of each one. So I go through and I do sum of let's say this column, although it's gonna, well, it didn't give me the error because of the it noticed this is a label rather than a number. Sometimes you can get an error, but this time it did not. So if you get the error, you can always just remove them, and it'll sum. And the cool thing about doing the sum for this, the sum of the whole column, is if I add a new number here, it automatically updates the formula. And this is what makes the Excel functions really useful, because it automatically updates in any cell on any workbook in any sheet. If you go down here to multiple sheets. So let's say on sheet 2, if I do this for sum, I have to go back and nominate it from sheet 1, and it'll see, if I click on sheet 1 while still in that formula, it puts it up here automatically. And then I do this. I do that, and on sheet 2 it's updated at 78, just like it says here. But if I also add another number, this one updates to 91, as does this one. So all the sheets are connected in terms of the formula, as long as you identify which sheet it came from. So that's a cool feature that it has. In terms of the use of it, so let's go back to what we were doing of finding them. So we said this is the sum of the x values. Let's do this. So this corner down here, when you use this corner to move, like I did right here, across, you see it gives me a number for a formula, but it's not the same number as this function. So when you do use this box down here, the aspect of this is that it will change the values of the function in the same way that you drag the box. So since I dragged it to the right, it's going to change all of my columns 1 over. So since I was operating in column A here, it did the sum of column A. But since I dragged it to the right, it's going to drag the points in the formula to the right. So it did the sum of column B. And this will always work. So as usual, this updates with it. So that's a key feature. And if you ever don't want it to do that, let's say, for instance, we'll do that. If you don't want it to copy your, oops, that's the wrong one. Backwards. For instance, if you don't want it to change them, it used to be, I don't remember if it was an exclamation point, but there's a for instance, here, sum of, let's say, A2. I think it was, or was it? There was some command, I don't remember, that changed that stopped the numbers from changing. I thought it was an exclamation point. I don't recall exactly what it was. Pound key. It might be the pound key. Nope. But for sum, we'll go back and type in the sum. So we have the sums of column A and column B. We can actually use a cell that already has a function in it and apply it to another cell for a function. So if we want to find the mean, first of all, we'll say this is sums of x, sum of y, and then we can do numbers of x and numbers of y. And then we use the function count, and this one will matter for this 14. So there's 14 points there, and then we'll do the same thing here. Just do it. 14, and then we can just do for mean of x, mean of y, the function. We don't have to actually specifically use functions like sum. We can do equal sign, and then we can do a regular equation. So we'll say we want the cell containing the sum, which is C2 here. We just click on that, and then we want to divide that by the number of x's, and then we just close the parentheses and it will automatically divide it. And we can do the same here, and as you recall, if we do this and drag it over, it should do the same because it moved C2 to D2 to get sum of y, and then it moved E2 to F2 to get 14 here. So that will give us our means. So this is a very good productivity tool. It cuts down a lot of calculations and it's almost always accurate. Usually if it gives you a wrong number, it's either by rounding or your formula was messed up or numbers messed up, anything. Something was wrong in some spot. So in terms of recommendations, I would totally recommend using Excel. Usually, 'cause Excel's pretty common to come across with Microsoft Office, and it is extremely easy to use once you get the hang of it. The formula tab can look really menacing at first, but the descriptions they give really help. For instance, if I go up here and I just do I see AVE, it looks like I wouldn't know what that would mean at first, but then it returns the average of the absolute deviations. So you do that, and then clicking on it gives you the function arguments. But let's say for math, say we didn't know what sum was. Do the same thing with sum. And then even if you type it in, as we saw earlier, like this, it tells you what you need to add in each one. Like with the binomial distribution, it tells you once the number of successes followed by the number of trials, the probability percentage, and the cumulative. So it always tells you. It's very user-friendly in that regard, where it might look menacing, but it's got a lot of built-in help to it. And once you get the hang of it, it is a very powerful tool for statistics, both graphically, as we saw with being able to plot all these different types of graphs and charts, and with computations. It is extremely useful. So I would highly recommend it for any statistics course, or even for any base of statistics and probability in lower courses. It is very powerful, and I do think it can be a good way of minimizing time doing computations and maximizing the time doing the learning of concepts.